Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Avi Rajagopal, Editor-in-Chief of Metropolis Magazine, and I'm so thrilled to have you all with us here today. We're here talking about the future of surfaces, and we're doing that because we've been on a bit of a roller coaster this past year, right? With the pandemic, the science around what keeps us healthy and safe has really, changed week to week, month to month. I think all of us remember the days when we were wiping down grocery bags and washing our hands obsessively. Hopefully you're still washing your hands obsessively. But we do know now that that fomite transmission, that is transmission to surfaces, may be a little bit less of a risk than we had thought as far as this pandemic is concerned. However, we've also learned a bigger lesson here that these kinds of global events are likely to occur again. It's also put a much bigger emphasis on how we select surfaces and products for interiors. And we've added that layer of health and safety and wellness to the things we've already been so concerned about, such as of course, aesthetics, performance, and maintenance. And maintenance, that last bit, is really key because it's a factor that we do consider as designers often, but we've very rarely had to consider such extreme scenarios as we faced this past year. So there's much for us to discuss, much for us to learn about what lies ahead for selecting surfaces for design projects. Before we begin, a quick thank you to our sponsor today, Tile of Spain, for making this discussion possible. And before we hear from our panelists, we actually have a short message for you from Tile of Spain on video. So we're going to cue that up now. Kelly, let's take a look at that. Thank you so much, Tile of Spain, for making today's discussion possible. Here with me to talk about how surfaces are going to change in the future, and what influences we might see, what trends we might see in the near future in interior design as a result of that. We have with us Ala Zregat, who is the co-founder of Astet, a design studio based in Spain. Ala, such a pleasure to have you here with us today. We also have with us Ryan Fazan, who is a technical consultant and ceramic tile specialist with Tile of Spain. Ryan, such a pleasure to have you. And Dr. Andrew Dent, who is the Executive Vice President of Library and Materials Research at Material Connection and the Chief Material Scientist at Material Bank, both of which, of course, are sister companies to Metropolis. Andrew, always a pleasure to have you. Ala, tell us a little bit about Astet and your approach to materials as part of your design process. How does material selection play into your broader sort of design philosophy? And has anything changed since the pandemic in how you think or approach about your projects?
First of all, thank you everyone for joining. Thanks, Avi, for your question. Astet is a studio based in Barcelona. We're a group of 10 interior designers and architects. We come from all around the world. I think between the 10 of us, we speak 7 languages. We each and everyone has a different cultural background. We've been, in different circumstances, different environments, and we all come together in the studio. And I think this only enhances the design product that we work on. And your question about innovating different design materials, what has changed? A lot. I mean, we are always innovating. We're always trying to produce new materials, new finishes, trying to adapt to new, and respond to new requirements. But we never had really hygiene or sanitization in the heart of the design strategy. It was always an afterthought, and not even an afterthought. Like we would have never thought of how do we clean this, or how do we make sure that this is, that a virus wouldn't stay on the surface for 4 hours or 10 hours. Like, who would have thought we had to really, think about these things? The thing is, we're still trying to understand this pandemic, and it's still evolving. And I think what we are all doing right now is kind of like rewriting the future of interior design. I mean, we have to, we just can't wait for another, and I'm not just talking about another pandemic or another virus, but any other global emergency that requires a sudden change of social dynamics within days. I mean, you see how, now we're always talking about the new normal, but now it's just like more normal than new. We're used to these things. We're just used to it, where it's become part of our daily life. So yes, it does affect the design process. Yes, it does affect the way we think about spaces, obviously. I just want to say one thing, like, we usually, when we for example, think about spaces, when we think about designing restaurants or hotels or houses, we think of the wellness of the user as a priority now, because this person might find himself stuck in that space for a very long time. So it's not the same. It's not the same as before. We need to focus on outdoor spaces. We need to focus on spaces that are adaptive, that are flexible, that are versatile. A living room should work as a home office, should work as a place where children need to be homeschooled. So it's just, I would say it's a completely different approach to design. And this also takes me and leads me to the fact that these new ideas, these new strategies need to be backed up with new materials and new innovative surfaces as well. So yeah, it's all connected, Navi.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what a time of change, and Allah, you put it just perfectly, right? What do we do the next time social dynamics change again, and especially, considering that we are, dealing with a larger crisis, which is the climate crisis. None of us wants to see materials wasted, large scale demolitions, large scale changes happen for, at a moment's notice, and be done in an irresponsible way. So there's really this, I think, shift in terms of how we approach design, as you say, to think about affordances, to think about flexibility, and yes, to think about surfaces as well. One last thing I just want to say is, that when we talk about maintenance and cleanability, that's also in some ways an equity issue, right? The health of a space affects everyone in the space equally, more or less. But it also affects some of the people who are most likely the least privileged people to interact with the space, which is maintenance staff, right? Or facilities folks. And so, we have a responsibility to those people as well, right? We have a responsibility to everyone who interacts with the spaces we design. So thank you so much, Ala. Like, I think you just opened up a lot of different frontiers for us. Ryan, I'd love to bring you in here. When we talk about, surfaces that are easy to maintain and disinfect, certainly, I'm sure, as a tile expert, you've seen a bunch of action on the ceramics and tile front, right? A lot more attention there. Plus, of course, in the ceramic tile world, we're also thinking about sustainability, as I just said, right? We're thinking a lot about, how much material are we using? How is the product being made? What is the end of life, and so on. Tell us a little bit about, what things have changed for you in terms of surface trends from your vantage point.
Well, I mean, being really involved in the tile industry for a very long time, a lot of the things that are becoming top of mind for people these days, with the sort of focus around health and hygiene and the materials that they're putting into their spaces, is a lot of what we've been saying in the ceramic tile industry for, you know, as long as tile's been around, which is basically all of human history. The fact that it's an inert material and benign and comes from abundant resource materials is a huge sort of core factor of ceramics. So it's always been a big thing for countries that produce ceramics and use it a lot in their architecture. So that's becoming a lot more top of mind for us here in North America. And a lot of the trends are sort of morphing around that. With the advent of large format gauge porcelain and the ability to use it in worktops and in wall cladding, as well as flooring and other traditional areas that we think about tile for, you get all of those benefits in a lot more areas in a space. And the long-term use effects of it, like it's one of the longest term materials that we can put into our spaces. When you look at EPDs and things like that on most category materials, they'll have their first use case carbon footprint and things like that, and then they'll have a replacement frequency over the lifetime of a building, which is in product category rules about 50 years. Tile, those two columns are the same, whereas almost everything else that we put into our spaces, it gets drastically different as you move through the lifespan of a building. So all of these things being much more top of mind for end users today is really sort of shifting the trends. And then in terms of aesthetics, I think we're seeing a lot of really cool things happen in the space of ceramics, where we're bringing a lot of our artisanal history into our modern programs and really kind of flushing out that biophilic connection and relationship to the natural world and plants and vegetation in and outside and surrounding our spaces. So the spaces that we're creating with modern ceramics today have a lot more relationship with the world around them, which I think is incredibly interesting.
Right. You remind me of, what makes selecting surfaces such an exciting task usually, for designers. It's because like surfaces just carry so much, right? I mean, you might be thinking of a thin tile or a wall covering or, a tabletop or something like that. And it's not just function. It's not just, the chemistry of the material, it's carbon footprint, all of that. But also, it has a material effect on our bodies in terms of, any off-gassing that it might have or any interaction it might have with the interior environment. But at the same time, there's this giant cultural load, right? And you were talking, as you were talking, I was thinking about how, this year at KBIS, I mean, certainly, with releases, we're seeing a lot of whites, a lot of neutrals, just this response to kind of, having a more, hygienic world, so to speak. It's just very interesting how these trends kind of come and go in a category that's really, it has such history. And that's what makes talking about surfaces so exciting. Just a shameless plug in here. If you haven't looked at Metropolis's September issue from last year, we did a whole issue on the A to Z of surfaces. I urge you to check it out. Andrew, I'd love to bring you in here. I'm sure you work with companies around the world and with global footprints, selecting materials with them, and I'm sure you're inundated with questions about disinfection and cleaning and antimicrobials, and that sort of science has shifted, has changed. Attitudes, are constantly shifting. Just I think a couple of weeks ago, the Healthy Materials Collaborative with ZGF and Perkins and Will and a few other firms doubled down and sent out another sort of, primer on antimicrobials. Has the dust settled a little bit? Like, where does the science point us as far as surfaces are concerned? What do you see as kind of bubbling up as priorities when it comes to surfaces in interior design?
Yes, there was a sea change in what people are asking for in surfaces once the pandemic hit, and quite rightly, because we suddenly became frightened of interacting with anything, other humans, yes, of course, but also our surfaces as well. Our surfaces became something that we need to be wary of. So I think there was a lot of concern. How do we make sure, whether in a retail space or a hotel or just in general office space, how do we ensure that the people in there don't feel frightened of the surfaces they touch? And the initial thing was, okay, let's clean the heck out of it. Let's clean everything. And then the concern came, well, okay, I've got a surface which is relatively delicate. Will it be able to deal with all of the new caustic cleaners that we're coming up with? So I think there was a sort of immediate concern about the surface. Then, okay, let's clean it. And then, of course, people wanted to start putting antimicrobials and that sort of thing on the surface. And I think, yes, my general idea has been that I think antibacterials, antimicrobials work. They certainly are effective, but I think you should be careful and sparing where you place them. I think it is better to do have either materials which are easily cleanable, are maintenance free. But I think, so there are areas where antimicrobials and antibacterials are useful. And certainly we've had a lot of questions about that. And there are some which are better than others, some which are better, longer lasting. In general, though, my recommendation would be, let's try and avoid them as best we can, because what happens is you put more antibacterials out there and then the bacteria become more resistant. And then we have superbugs. That's always the challenge. So I think more easy clean surfaces using less caustic cleaners. But I think, yes, in general, there was a sort of a knee-jerk reaction. We've got to get our surfaces clean. I think as the dust has settled, we're understanding now, yes, we're less concerned about the actual surfaces and contracting stuff from them. But as you said, there will be a point at which there is going to be another scare, and is going to be something, and it may well be a different virus. It may be bacteria. We have to understand that this is, we talk about the new normal. At least going forward, we have to be more aware of these services, how to make sure that they are maintained and clean, and therefore make sure the materials themselves are enjoyable to touch, but also safe to touch as well. And one other thing with that, I think, the one challenge I had also with the pandemic is that it has also made us understand that when you compare it to sustainability, the pandemic was immediate, deadly, and it basically everyone changed their way of life in order to adapt to it. Sustainability is ultimately still as deadly, it's just not as quick. And our challenge is that, I wish we could have the same sort of call to arms, call to action that we did for the pandemic for sustainability. I think that's one of the biggest challenges is we saw what the pandemic can do, and it was immediate and it was health-based. So therefore we upended our worlds. I would love to see the same sort of concern about sustainability, because it is going to have the same sort of effect. It's just over a longer time frame. So I think that's always a challenge. We can make these changes. We can affect change. It's just with sustainability, it's a little bit longer time frame. So therefore, it's harder to get people excited about it. So I wish we would sort of would have that same sort of appreciation of what sustainability is doing to us and the planet.
Right, absolutely. And and there are places where those two things, right, the health concerns and the sort of broader sustainability intersect, right? So when we're thinking about using materials that don't have any red list chemicals in them, it's about sustainability. Yes, we don't want these complex chemistries in these products. They have effects throughout the supply chain, and they affect ecosystems everywhere. But at the same time, they also might affect the biologies of people who are interacting with it. So it's not just about. It is about the surface being clean, but also about what the surface might be doing in its interaction with the atmosphere, in its interaction with water, in its interaction with our skin. There's just so many other factors that we've become so sensitive to now, hopefully, after this pandemic. And hopefully, that's a bridge for us to start thinking about those bigger changes that we need for sustainability as well. A quick reminder to everyone who's listening in, I see we have some questions already coming in. Please go ahead and put your questions into the Q&A chat. Just a reminder, we welcome questions about tile, because of course we have Ryan on the panel and Andrew as well. But questions in general about surfaces are also welcome. So please keep those coming in. Before we start to take the audience questions, I just love to take, I just like to get one question out to all of you. Do you see examples? Do you see any indicators of some kind of a new materiality in projects? A la, for instance, like, do you find yourself as a designer drawn to certain types of materials, or at least exploring certain types of materials for future projects? Ryan, do you see, preferences in terms of type of materials, even within the tile industry? And Andrew, like, with all this energy, are you seeing people gravitate towards certain categories of materials? So let's just think about that and talk about that for a few seconds before we jump into the questions from the audience.
Do you want to go first?
Go ahead, Ala.
Ala, go ahead.
Okay. Yes, definitely. I mean, as I said before, we're always innovating and trying to find new solutions, new materials to work with. And, we're talking a lot about ceramics, and this is something that, I'd like to double down on, is that this material is not only very easy to disinfect and very easy to clean, but it's also 100% recyclable. So it's not just a material that works as an answer to what we're going through, but it's also a good material to use because it doesn't have a lot of carbon footprint. It's 100% recyclable. It's durable in case of fires or things like that. So we're always testing these kinds of materials and trying to find new solutions. Also, I would like to say that the fact that ceramic tiles are so versatile. I mean, you can choose any color. You can add a lot of warmth to a space. You can use it in different forms and different colors. And the fact that it's easy to clean and disinfect. I mean, I think it's one of the materials that everyone is trying to work with nowadays. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of sort of to reinforce what I was saying at the beginning. A lot of the inherent characteristics of tile are becoming much more front and center focus for people with their new understanding in this sort of post-pandemic situation, and thinking a lot more critically about, does the material that I'm putting in off gas, and even if it doesn't, is it a sink for other VOCs in a space and cleaners that need to be used in a space? Tile has that benign inert characteristic that it's zero VOC, and it doesn't wind up as a sink. And as Ala was saying, like protecting things in case of other forms of disaster like fire or flood, often a hard, durable surface like ceramic not only protects the materials and substrates beneath it, but also protects, mold growth and smoke smell from getting into the materials behind it as well. So this kind of much more holistic take on material selection, I think, is really, really healthy for the design industry. I think it's one of the net positives that's coming out of this sort of global state that we're in. So I find it incredibly interesting in terms of the way designers are thinking about materials for their spaces now.
Ryan, is ceramic tile, are they 100% fireproof, or to an extent?
I mean, everything's, the average white body ceramic is fired at 1800 degrees Celsius. A porcelain is about 2200 degrees Celsius. They don't smoke or burn at any, at really any. Once they're sintered at the hottest point of the kiln, they actually, it's a chemical reaction. So it's a fusing of the clays and silicates and feldspar that's within that body. So we get a lot of questions from design professionals like, what's the flame spread rating for a ceramic? And it's literally non-applicable.
Actually, Avi, if I can sort of add an opinion on this, I think what's interesting to me is that I think we've now reached a much better understanding of our materials. So whenever a designer's thinking about a material, it's there's the basic consideration. Okay, is it easy to install? What does it look like? What does it feel like? But I think also there's a bunch of other considerations. It was talked about, recyclability. Thinking about cleanability. There's sort of, I think, the considerations we have when choosing a material is now, there's a very much longer list of requirements. And I think people now are expecting designers and expecting material producers to have thought of a much greater range of potential concerns or advantages for their particular material. It's no longer, here's a beautiful surface, you know, isn't it nice to touch? It's now, okay, this material came from, it now could potentially go into after the end of its life. While it's in, you know, while it's there, it's as you mentioned, zero off-gassing. There's a lot in the same way we have for clothing, the same way we have for food. I think materials for design, we've now got a much greater and much more nuanced understanding of what that material should be. We want to make sure that any material choice that we make has considered the entire life cycle of it. I want to know what's in it. I want to know what it does to a human if they interact with it. At the end of its life, what do we do with that product? What additional functionality can it provide me? So I think inevitably, you have a lot of material manufacturers who are a lot more careful about what they're producing, how they're producing it, and are a lot sort of more clear about its various different advantages and disadvantages. Because with the internet, people are going to find out. And if they do find out, they're going to basically let everyone else know. So I think it's a lot harder now to put a material out there, an innovative material out there, or just a standard design material for design, if you haven't done your homework. Because I think designers are a lot more clued in about their clients wanting a much greater level of understanding and information about each material choice they make.
Right, absolutely. And of course, if you're interested in sustainability and wellness in your projects, a quick shout out to some of the great tools that are out there. You should look at Mindful Materials. It's free to use for designers, Mindful Materials, as well as a host of others. If you're in the healthcare sector, you should look into HHI, which is the Healthier Hospitals Initiative. There's so many initiatives out there that are trying to do that sifting work for designers. Look for ILFI's Declare label on products, which is kind of nutritional label, but for the makeup of materials. There's just so much good stuff out there for designers who are interested in knowing more. And as you said, Andrew, very little place for folks to hide, in terms of not doing the right thing by human health or sustainability. Let's take some of our audience questions now. We have Marsha Bichelle here. She says, how do you balance trends in ceramics, in ceramic visuals versus the 50-year lifespan? The benefits go away if someone decides in 10 years that tile is too 2020 and that they need a new version. So, how do we look at aesthetics? And this is applicable to all materials, really. How do we look at aesthetics and durability, which we know is necessary for that sustainability framework? So just any thoughts on that from any of you?
First off, the tile industry, understands very well the lifespan and tends to take a much longer view on trends. Like you rarely see exactly Pantone's color of the year in most collections that are introduced, or something of that sort that is very characteristic of one given point in time. So the trends in tile tend to be much broader and better able to weather shifting trends. That said, I think it's also part of the responsibility of the design professional involved in a project, that if they're dealing with something that is long-standing like ceramic, incorporating that into the retrofit design and being able to harvest and use as much of that building stock as possible. In the case of a fresh build, it's knowing that this is going to be here for 50 years. So if you want that perfect color that's right for this time or pattern that's only right for this sort of period of design, then maybe you do that in a soft finish like your textiles and your paints and other things that aren't going to be there forever. So I think those are two ways to address it.
Absolutely. Alan, Andrew, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, also, sorry.
Just a quick one. It's interesting. I've got a number of different retail clients who are trying to find ways in which they can have tile that they can then remove within a, say, 5 to 7 years time span. So the average store, they'll do a refit between 5 and 7 years if it's a high-end store. And they've been asking us, how do we then have materials that we can put down, use, and then at the end of that 7 years, then put them somewhere else, a second life for the ceramic tile. So I mean, we don't yet have an ideal solution for that, but certainly retail stores are asking for that sort of thing because they know they need to replace it relatively quickly. They would love to use the durability and easy maintenance of ceramic tile, but then how do they then pull it up afterwards and then potentially use it in a different store? So that's certainly a question that's been asked multiple times and something we don't have an answer to, but I would love to find a solution for that.
Doing a 15 mil or 2 cm thick porcelain material on a mechanically fastened system is something that I know a lot of stores. There's a couple in Valencia that do that, so that their flooring and their cladding matches their spring summer collection versus their fall winter collection, or that are doing multiple rebranding. So looking at the mechanically fastened systems works ideally for that. It can then be salvaged and resold and utilized on another project, or moved to a different location for that brand. So that's one solution.
Thank you for that.
Question, Ryan, does this way of fixation, does it make the tile less durable, for example, because it's not against like a hard
No, so that's why the industry is coming out with a lot of the thicker product is it's a structural ceramic piece. So it's not just a cladding material, it's a structural piece of ceramic because of its added thickness. So there's multiple different ways to do it for both flooring and wall cladding. That's mechanically fastened. There's right. Adjustable pedestals if you have that space in the cavity, which also then lets you run infrastructure underneath if you need to pull network cables or anything like that. It's very easy to reconfigure a space because you're not yanking tile up out of mortar. Yeah. The same systems work ideally for exterior cladding, flooring, for things like patios and things like that, where you can deal with the slope and the waterproofing and everything below the surface. So mechanically fastened systems are actually one area where you can really sort of reconceptualize how you can use tile in a space for different types of clients.
Yeah, and I think, what you're generally, I think all of you are coming to is we really need to think about how surfaces are fastened, how they're deployed, how they're attached to structure or substructure, because, reduce is best, reuse is next, and recycle is last, right? I mean, I think, if we can use the materials that we need to use, and then if we can find ways to reuse them or design them so that they can be reused, and then, if all else fails, of course, if we're able to recycle them rather than to send them into landfill, I mean, I think that's really the priorities, for any material. And for tile, it's great to hear of all the innovations that are happening to actually make that happen. It's just absolutely fantastic. We have quite a few questions piled up here. One of our attendees asks, for tiles, built-in microbials are being offered, but how does putting a heavy metal like silver that must leach to work a good option for the environment? And of course, we also have a response that said that silver works through a contact reaction. It's not considered a heavy metal, but it raises a point, right? I mean, antimicrobials, and Andrew, maybe you want to take this one. There's all this question about, in order to be active, they have to come in contact with the air. They have to come in contact with the microbials. That means they also come in contact with us. And that poses a whole bunch of different questions. So if you can just address that for us, then we can, I think, move on.
Sure. Okay. So a little bit of silver is okay. A lot of silver is very bad. So, and if you are going to use silver, put it in something where it won't come out. So there are ways in which you can do it. So, I'm very much against the use of antimicrobials in clothing, because every time I wash that clothing, a little bit of the silver comes out because the fibers themselves break down and come out. For harder surfaces, it's okay, because that silver can be on that surface. And it can also be locked well onto that. So touching silver, silver is the first thing that comes into contact with a human. Is basically they put it into eyes as a way of cleaning out, as an antibacterial for eyes. So silver is a wonderful material. You just can't use too much of it. And if you are going to use it in surfaces where it doesn't move. It's as simple as that. So I think that's probably the best way to go about it. And silver is certainly a lot better than some of the chemical versions. Zinc is probably a little bit less concerning than silver, but it doesn't work as well. So you have to, silver's very effective. You can use it in small amounts. Zinc is slightly less effective, but it's also less of a biocide. But I think certainly, yeah, just use it sparingly, use it in surfaces where it won't move and maintains activity for a long period of time.
Ryan, you want to comment on that quick?
Yeah, but I mean, bioavailability is the big issue, and when different oxides are encapsulated in the glaze, in this case, they were asking about ceramics, and when it's encapsulated in the glaze, and most of them are photosynthetic, and they're using light as a catalyst to do their work, it's not bioavailable for humans. It's not a hazardous thing for humans. I do totally agree with Andrew that we don't want to just have everything be a nuker for any living organism that comes in contact with it. That's not a good thing for us. I mean, all you have to do is look at the pesticide industry and what happened with the widespread adoption of pesticides to understand that overkill is not a good thing, and we tend to do that. Utilizing a hard surface that has strategic uses of different neutralizing compounds that are encapsulated within something that's impervious, like a glaze layer, is an ideal use case. Like Andrew said, it's stationary, it's hard and durable. You can't really leach it out without the contact with heavily acidic or pH basic materials. So the touching a glazed surface that has a titanium oxide or a silver oxide encapsulated within the surface is much safer than something like clothes.
Right. A quick follow-up to that, David Carlson asks, rather than antiseptic surfaces, is there capacity for tile to be engineered to host beneficial probiotics, be a substrate for algae, lichen, mosses selected for their beneficial qualities without affecting life of tile substrate? I mean, have you guys heard of things like that coming on board?
There are a bunch of really interesting research proposals that are ongoing in the Ceramic Union in Europe right now. That's under their roadmap to 2050 of sustainability and things like that. And I know that they're working on a couple of different probiotic use cases and things like that. I think I don't know of any in particular. I do think that it's probably a really interesting area to explore because of how non-reactive ceramics are. So in the case of being a benign substrate, I think it would be ideal for something like that. I just don't know what the use case would be.
Sure. We have a question from Sanchari Mahapatra. Hi, Sanchari, by the way. She says, has there been a change in interest for sustainable materials due to the pandemic? Ala, let's hear if that's one of the things that's become top of mind for you this past year, and then we'll hear from Ryan and Andrew as well. You design a lot of hospitality spaces, a lot of residential spaces, not typically where sustainability tends to be first of mind, honestly, if we're being frank here. Are you seeing a renewed interest even from clients or from the people you're talking to or from your own team in sustainability?
Yes and no. That really depends on the client. I mean, we try to push for sustainability as much as we can, but until now, I think trying to go for sustainable materials and sustainable solutions is still quite expensive to do so. I mean, a lot of clients don't have the patience and are not willing to invest, unfortunately, into that. But we're always trying as much as we can. I mean, more than just more than just the material itself, but just also the space, the ideas. I mean, we always push for that, but it's always a battle between that and what the client wants and how much the client is willing to spend. So, I mean, that's the honest, unfortunate answer.
No, absolutely, and I think that's fair. That's a lot of the same thing that everyone comes up with, in pushing for sustainability. And that's why I think the change has to be systemic, right? And we need to build incentives into the larger systems in order to, make it easier to specify sustainably and to work with clients on those things. Mark Ostrom has a question. Acoustics will be a strong driver in hospitality, workplace, and healthcare. I mean, it already is. What materials or surfaces address the myriads of attributes that we've been discussing, that I presume also he's asking, that provide acoustic, performance? Andrew, any new movement on acoustics?
I mean, certainly acoustics is one of the aspects of wellness that is, sometimes overlooked, in that, the sound in a space can be as calming or as jarring as the air itself. Yes, the challenge with acoustics is always that the more acoustically absorbing materials tend to be softer and more porous, and therefore that becomes a challenge. So you are caught between two things there. So I think, the desire of the ultimate cleanable room is basically a stainless steel box. We can make sure that is pristine and antimicrobial and super clean. However, we want to live in, we want to exist in livable spaces. So I think, yes, there is always a bit of a trade-off between those two, in that good acoustics requires softer surfaces, unless you do actually have, it is possible to create hard surfaces that do have acoustic properties. However, they tend to be much more engineered. So it is that challenge. So the thought is really, is it possible to achieve acoustic absorption through materials that perhaps are in addition to, rather than the base materials? And we were talking about, I think Ram's talking about how when designing with ceramic tile, you tend to use that as a baseline, and then the color trends, etc., tend to are based more upon the materials that are likely to move and are reusable. So I think with acoustics, if you can get it through the additional materials rather than the base material, I think that's probably a better solution. Those then can be cleaned, can be replaced if necessary, can be recycled. So that we're getting that better absorption through softer surfaces, which aren't necessarily part of the main structure of the building. So I think, yeah, but I think I do want to reiterate, I think acoustics is probably one of the most important aspects of wellness, because if we cannot find a calm place to exist, then the simple existence at the moment of me living in and working from my apartment and having my kids schooling in the next room, that is always a challenge to our ability to work productively. So I think acoustics are very important. I think it is going to always be a challenge to try and have them that are very effective while still maintaining a very easy to clean and durable surface.
There are research projects that are ongoing right now, both with ITC in Spain and Harvard's Graduate School of Design, where they're exploring the use of 3D printing with ceramic medium to create acoustical panels. So just in the layered building of 3D printing models, being able to get convoluted shapes and more texturized shapes in a ceramic material is something that is being explored currently. There's also manufacturers that are making slim tile, like 3.7 mil thick slim tile with acoustical backing for drop ceiling applications and things like that we see often in commercial environments. So we're looking for ways to incorporate hard surfaces in more acoustical design settings.
And Ala, in the hospitality space, of course, where you do a lot of projects, I mean, acoustics is just top of mind, right?
Always, in all common spaces, bedrooms. I mean, it adds to the comfort of the user. So acoustics is something we always think about as well. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's what's interesting is, of course, is when we think about acoustic soft materials, then we have to think about their maintenance and cleanability and disinfection with all of this stuff. And those more engineered hard surface materials that have acoustics as well are an interesting new avenue for designers. We have two linked questions about tile recycling. Adam Lillian says, when tiles are recycled, what are some of the more unknown uses of the output? And then further down, we have a question from Laura Freeman, who says, I know tile is recyclable, but where can we recycle it? Typically, we have tile left over after a project, and I would love to recycle many manufacturers don't take leftovers, and charitable organizations really want full boxes. So, we come up against this, there's an intention to do the right thing, but we still don't have the systems in place. Can we just talk a little bit about the state of recycling for ceramics? Again, shameless plug here, Andrew just wrote a column about that for Metropolis. It's in our next issue, so look out for that. But let's talk about recycling and ceramics.
Maybe we let Andrew lead off then.
Sure. I mean, yes. I mean, it is. Recycling of ceramics is hard. It is not like a metal. We understand that. There are many ways in which tile is recycled and can be used in other resources. It is also possible to recycle the tile itself and put it back into something which is similar to a tile. If we're talking about post-industrial, there's a fair amount of recycling, but post-consumer, as in after it's actually gone into an installation, it is more challenging. The industry itself understands that and is trying to find ways in which it can be more resourceful and find solutions. So there is research out there trying to chemically reduce it or find other ways of doing it so that the material itself can be used back again into more tile. And we have seen a number of different dinnerware, some wall tiles, some bricks actually being constructed as a company in the Netherlands called waste-based bricks that will take ceramic tile from construction sites and actually manufacture that back into bricks. So it's tough to go from tile to tile. So as in you recycle one tile, make it into a new tile. That is very tough. It's possible to do it post-industrial, but not really post-consumer. But there are other resources. So we've seen cups, plates, wall tiles. We've also seen construction bricks manufactured out of recycled tile. And maybe Ryan, you've got a few other suggestions as well.
Yeah, there's a few. I mean, one of the easiest and most readily available local sources is gravel and cement aggregate manufacturers. Tile is a wonderful, clean aggregate for mixed aggregate cements and concretes, road beds, drainage. So dropping it off at a gravel and or concrete supplier, they're happy to take it in most cases. That's one that's very, very easy for anyone to find locally to get it into a viable use case rather than just chucking it in a landfill. I know that there's in areas of manufacture, so we may start to see it in Tennessee, down in the US, where there's a lot more tile manufacturing happening, but certainly in Spain and other areas where there's a lot of manufacturing, a lot of the factory seconds and thirds are going into public works projects. Like there's one entire city square in Spain where the benches, the paving and everything is vertically laminated tiles, so that it's permeable, there's drainage below, and it's a benign, very, very durable substrate for public spaces. So there are a bunch of different pilot projects looking into how tile can get repurposed. Like to Andrew's point, it's very difficult to take a tile and make another tile out of it at the end of its useful lifespan. But the 3 R's, the last one is recycle. So you want to try and find ways to reduce or reuse, and where we're focused in the ceramic industry, because it's perfectly usable, even though it may not be pretty on a wall or a floor. It's perfectly usable for all kinds of different use cases in a reuse case. So,
right. We have a question that's pretty broad here, and if whatever pieces any of you feel comfortable chewing off, let's take it on. Jen Henriquez says, what considerations are prioritized for lifespan performance when materials are evaluated on effects which impact people, air, surroundings, wellness, etc.? Specifically looking at options which must be in buildings, so elevator, door, and restroom, and preferences for minimal contact or none. So I guess, how do we select materials? It is a complex question, I understand, but how do we select materials, when we think about their whole lifespan? And are there materials that you found, thinking about durability or cleanability, that you're going to as go-tos right now, even if they're not, perfect. I'd love to hear from all of you. I mean, Ala, as you're thinking of durability, I mean, you talked about ceramic tile as a great option. Are there other options that you're looking at in terms of just, how do you clad public space? How do you, especially in high traffic areas, in restaurants and so on?
Well, the trend now with tile is also this kind of stucco kind of finish. So we do a lot of micro cement. We work a lot with marble, with all these noble materials that have been since a very long time. And these materials, they never lose kind of they never go out of fashion. So marble, terrazzo, granite, wood, cement. So these materials we're always combining with tiles, always trying to use them. They're timeless, I think, in my opinion. But the idea is also not to just go with one material and one element throughout the entire space. The idea is to mix, to be able to, show tiles or other materials in conversation and dialogue with each other. So, and this way you'll always get a product that, is more interesting and lasts longer, I think.
Right. Yeah, composing a material palette, and I love that you call them, noble materials. Exactly, right? We forget some of those classic materials sometimes that, are high performance. I see a question about wool further down that's coming to you, Andrew, in a few minutes. But, there are all of these materials that have evolved with humans, through our civilization, like tile, for such a long time. And yes, and there's a place for great innovation, and I'm sure, algae facades will be a thing someday. But, I think, we shouldn't forget the basics. So thanks for reminding us of that, Ala. We have a question from Ruth Crump. What about the ancillary products used in tile work, like mortars and grouts? How do we think holistically of materials we use from that perspective? And we have some responses there from Kurt Rapp and Lee Hopper about, mortar being the weakest link to the intrinsic longevity of tile. How does one plan for the eventual need to replace mortar? Ryan, do you have any tips on that?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of mechanically fastened systems, things like ventilated facades and tile as rain screen, as well as the raised access flooring for interiors and exteriors that we were talking about earlier. So removing mortar from the equation in some cases is the way to go. There's been a lot of innovation in the terms of mortars and underlayments and things like that, and a lot of the manufacturers either register with Green Squared, which is one of the first holistic multi-attribute standards that's unique to the tile industry, that incorporates cementitious backer units and mortars and everything that goes into the tile assembly. So that's one avenue that people can look at, as if the system is Green Squared certified. So there's a lot of things that are possible to look into in terms of the tile assembly, whether you go mortarless or different types of mortars. Most of them have dust abatement in them as well, so for worker health and hygiene, so that they're not breathing in any of those particulates as they're dumping the mortars into the bags and mixing them. So there's been a lot of innovation in terms of the ancillary products as well as the tile. That really speaks to that previous question, like questions like that one that were, how do we think about the long-term lifespan and its impacts on all these different things in our building? I'm so encouraged that we're seeing questions like that now. I think that the time that we've gone through the past 16 months is why we're having questions like that. And I think it's really important in terms of material discussion. And it really does lead to natural, benign materials like ceramic that do have that longstanding story and history and ease of ownership characteristics. So, yeah.
A quick question here about soft surfaces, and then we'll move on to our last question of the day. Andrew, Abby Paul asks, I've heard claims that wool can pull particulate matter and VOCs out of the air. and leather doesn't harbor viruses and bacteria. Is there any truth or science behind this? I think, in our universal search for, inert surface materials, we're trying to latch on to some long-standing ones. What are your thoughts on that? Wool and leather?
Certainly, sustainably harvest and ethically harvest wool is a great material. It's got that, I think the statement about, can it pull certain toxins from the air? Wool tends to absorb and then give off moisture. It basically tends to adapt to levels of humidity, and inevitably, if there are toxins in the air, they're probably connected to moisture as well. So there is the potential for it to remove those toxins in the same way that it would probably remove excess humidity from the air if it's out there. So it has that ability. I don't think it necessarily selectively removes toxins. It's more just sort of a general absorber of what's out there in the environment. Leather as well. Leather's a little bit more challenging because, of course, you inevitably do need to kill the cow or the kangaroo or whatever animal you're using from the leather. Often it's a byproduct of the meat industry, but I think I've heard that now we're using so much leather that unfortunately meat is now a byproduct of the leather industry. So I think they go kind of hand in hand. I think the material itself. We're seeing a lot of alternatives that are bio-based leathers, though. We've seen stuff from DNA-based. We've seen an awful lot of plant leathers, things coming from cactus, from pineapple fiber, etc. So there's definitely been a more interest in trying to find alternatives to leather. You've got some high-profile designers such as Stella McCartney who really don't want to use leather anymore for ethical reasons. But I still think it has great performance, great properties, and it lasts for such a long time. Good quality leather you should expect to last in 20, 30 years. So I think there are advantages and ethical questions, but certainly we can expect those sort of long-living, established natural materials, as long as they're harvested well and sustainably and ethically. I think there's a place for them, and they have great value.
Right. We're almost at time here. I just want to get one last thought from all our panelists, super brief. If you had to say, one thing that's top of mind for you when it comes to selecting surfaces or materials, what would that be? Take a second, just give us your last thoughts there, and then, we'll close out today's discussion. Everything's in cycles. So no longer just assume that putting a surface into a space is just a simple one-step process. Everything that you do has consequences. So whenever you put that material in, think about where it came from, how it's going to be used, and the end of its life, how long it's going to be there. So in any consideration, it's not just you putting that material on as a surface. That surface has a history and will have a future that you need to consider every time you make any material selection. Right. Ryan, any last thoughts? Yeah, building on that, I think that one really good question to ask yourself and your clients is what are these materials going to ask of me over the use case of this project, whether it's a residence, a hotel, an environment, that whatever that use case is, what are they going to ask of me in terms of cleaning, in terms of replacement? Rather than just the upfront cost and if it's pretty or not, that more holistic view, it gets us into a much better space in terms of what our building stock will be for our grandkids and what their decisions are going to have to be in terms of repurposement and refurbishment and things like that. So this much more well-rounded and grounded view that we're taking on material selection, I think, is a really healthy space for us to be in for design. Mm-hmm. Also, I think as professionals and designers, it's our responsibility to educate clients, not to just give in to putting, cheap materials and materials that are sustainable, but, also push back and try to, tell them this is how we're supposed to, move forward. I think we're responsible. I think it's a responsibility that we all have. And yeah. Thank you so much for that. And Ala, I think that's a perfect note for us to end on. There's a great joy in selecting materials. It's a lot of fun. There's so much amazing science out there. You can make a big difference with the materials that you select, and that also comes with responsibility. So thank you all so much for your inputs today. Ryan, Andrew, and Ala, it's been fantastic talking about surfaces and tiles with all of you. A big thank you to Tile of Spain for making today's discussion possible. Thank you so much for sponsoring today's discussion. And a huge thank you for our audience. It's been wonderful, by the way, to see the discussion that's been going on between people who clearly have some expertise in the audience as well, weighing in on discussions. I love the discussion about viruses and antimicrobials. There was a great discussion about, mortars and grouts. Fantastic. Thank you all so much. Thank you for being such engaged and responsible professionals. This is the future of surfaces, right? This is the future of surfaces. Industry professionals, manufacturers, designers who really care and who want to do the right thing. Thank you all so much for today's discussion, and have a great day.